I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 428. This is an early show for all of you. We're all going to be sort of taking the holiday weekend off, so I thought I would get this one out a little bit early. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're all able to gather with your family and friends for Thanksgiving, and that you're traveling. If you're traveling, you're doing so safely, and you get to where you're supposed to go safely and quickly, and return home safe and sound as well. For me, I'll be spending it with my Texas family. The majority of my family is back in North Carolina. So we're just hanging out here. My son's coming over he has to work on Thanksgiving Day, so he'll be coming over the day before Thanksgiving. So we will be sleeping off all the tryptophan while everyone else around the country is just getting tucked in for Thanksgiving. But anyway, let me begin things by first saying that one of the things that I give thanks for, and will be giving thanks for again this year, is you, dear listener. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week, and especially for those who have been regular listeners to the show for a number of years. Welcome back for those of you who are regular listeners, and welcome aboard for those of you who are new. I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here and listen to this, and I hope you'll come back for more next week. Do want to give a big thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club, especially, super specially, the members of the Reformation Gun Club. I am thankful for all of you and what you guys do you guys and gals do to make this show possible. This week's shout out goes out to Curtis from Junction City, Kansas, John from Spokane, Washington, Tim from Finlayson, Minnesota, Mitch from Stockbridge, Michigan, Ron from Lexington Park, Maryland, William from Bentonville, Arkansas, Guillaume from Osage Beach, Missouri, and Michael from Janesville, Minnesota. Thank you all, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club for your support. It really does mean a lot to me, and to all of us here at Armed Lutheran Radio. Folks, if you would like to find out more about becoming a member of the Reformation Gun Club, there's no limit or minimum donation. You can donate as little as you like. It's all done through Give, Send, Go. Visit reformationgunclub.com or armedlutheran.us/gun club. That will take you to our membership site, and which will give you all the details about the benefits, and then direct you, should you so choose, to Give, Send, Go to sign up to support the show. One of the great benefits is what we're going to be doing next week, which is our monthly online hangouts. You get invitations to those, opportunity to hang out with the cast and with other members of the club and shoot the breeze. And we'll be doing that for our November hangout next week. So come join us, reformationgunclub.com. Okay, this week, I wanted to take a look at a news story that came across my desk from Ohio, and I was curious to get your thoughts on this particular story and this particular topic. With Donald Trump preparing to take office in January, and with all the talk about immigration and deportation and gun rights, this story is an interesting one, and it comes to us from WSYX ABC 6 in Columbus, Ohio. and was reposted by several other outlets, including MSN and Fox News. Reading from the story, it says, a federal judge denied a motion to dismiss a gun charge against an Ohio man who was illegally in the United States for almost 2 decades. Carlos Serrano Restrepo was charged in early 2024 and later indicted for possession of a firearm by an alien unlawfully in the United States. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the federal government agency that sounds more like a party than an actual enforcement agency, they investigated Serrano Restrepo and conducted surveillance after he completed the purchase of 22 firearms. He claimed he was a U.S. citizen on the firearms forms. After a search of his home, still reading from the story, agents seized approximately 170 firearms, tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, and smoke/marine markers. I don't know what that means. At least one of the firearms was a .50 caliber Barrett rifle. Serrano Restrepo said some of the weapons were for self-defense. Photos showed that he kept the firearms in gun safes and handguns mounted in holsters on the wall of a closet. After the gun charge, his lawyer submitted a motion to dismiss, claiming that Serrano Restrepo has the right to bear arms under the Second Amendment. He had moved to Orient, Ohio in 2022 from Arizona. He told the court that he last entered the country without authorization back in 2008. He also owns a business that remediates fire and flood damage. On November 21st, so just this week, or late last week, I guess it was, the federal judge denied his motion to dismiss. So there's a lot to unpack here, because this is an interesting case on a lot of different levels, because we have both the immigration issue, the illegal alien issue here. We also have, but that's more complex than it seems. We also have the gun issue, and we also have the Second Amendment issue. What I mean by that is we have his possession of firearms as an illegal alien, but we also have the question of the Second Amendment. Does the Second Amendment apply to non-resident or to resident illegal aliens? So this is an interesting case. I don't think it's as cut and dried as it might seem. This is something that, and I'm sure there are going to be many more, that the Trump administration is going to have to come up with some sort of policy for how to deal with when they take office. And I'll explain a little more about why I say that here in a moment. What do we do with illegal aliens who have been in the United States for decades, and rather than being drains on society, instead of being sponges on the social welfare state, they've actually tried to integrate themselves into American society. They're not draining our resources. They're not committing violent crime, as so many of the more recent illegal immigrants have. We're talking about somebody who's been in the United States for 18 years. He has a driver's license. He has a tax ID. He has a social security number. And before you say anything, those 3 things were all given him by the government. He didn't lie on any forms, or he didn't steal somebody. A lot of times you hear about the illegal alien who comes here and through identity theft obtains social security numbers and these sorts of things. He didn't do this. He actually has documents from the United States government and from state governments. He obtained a driver's license in 2 states, one from Washington State, don't know exactly when that was, and one from Ohio. He was granted the right to stay in and work. He was granted a tax ID and a social security number, the tax ID for his business. And this is where things get whacked. He purchased firearms. Now, in 2017, so just a little more background on this guy from what I read. He and a partner founded a business in Ohio. In 2021, he bought out his partner, became the sole proprietor. It's a contracting company that, as I said earlier, or read from the story earlier, that mediates or mitigates, I should say, fire and water damage done to homes, like your local ServPro or Stanley Steamer, like the companies that I had to use when my house flooded a few years back. And he bought his own home in Orient, Ohio in 2022. He's living the American dream. He's not sponging off society. He's, from all indications, the exact kind of immigrant that we want coming to the U.S. Hardworking, industrious, ambitious, wanting to integrate into American society. Now, he went about it the wrong way, but this is the kind of person that we want coming to our ports of entry and being allowed into the country and eventually becoming citizens. And from the photos I saw in these news stories, he seems to have done a pretty decent job securing his firearms. He applied for asylum in 2022 after he bought his home in Orient, Ohio, and Homeland Security gave him permission to stay in the United States until his asylum claim was processed. So here's where the tough questions come in. Should he have been deported at that point? Right? He went to the Department of Homeland Security and applied for asylum at this point. He came out of the shadows and made himself known to government and was given permission to stay. And I think it's safe to say that after 9 years, so this was 2022, or that wasn't 9 years, 2022, that would have been 16 years in the country, that being here, building a life, buying a home, building a business, his claim after 16 years in the country of asylum is a little flimsy. But as much as we have rightly called out the immigration policies of the Biden-Harris administration over the past 4 years, the current amnesty policy apparently encouraged this guy to seek asylum. Now, he didn't do this like worrying that Trump was going to be reelected. He went and applied for asylum in 2022, not long after Trump had, a year after Trump had been defeated, or a year after Biden had taken office. He wants to be legal. He feared, I'm assuming he feared deportation. He might have remained in the shadows. We might not know about him today. And I think it's fair to make this assumption that if Trump had been in office, he might still be in the shadows. He might not have come forward. He might have feared being deported. Now, in 2022, shortly after his asylum claim, Homeland Security responded to his claim for asylum, granted him a temporary stay, but said he had failed to justify his delay in making his asylum claim, and they wanted him to come in and make some justification for why it took him from 2008 to 2022 to make the claim. Now, for those of you in Rio Linda, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, what is asylum? It's supposed to be when you flee your home country due to like war or famine or political violence. You fear going back because you might be killed. And normally you claim asylum by going to a U.S. embassy in your home country or near your home country, or at a point of entry on the U.S. border. Now, the Biden-Harris administration changed all of that, though, immediately after taking office, and basically said, come on across the border. We're going to temporarily grant you asylum to anybody who said, I fear going home to my home country. I want asylum. Typically, the way it worked was You had to go to a point of entry or to a U.S. embassy, and you had to somehow prove, you had to have some proof that you feared for your life in going back to your home country. You don't have to do that anymore, thanks to Biden and Harris. Now what we do is we fill out some paperwork, tell them to come back in 6 months, and then we release them into the U.S. And then we lose track of them because most of those people never show up for their hearings and they just melt away. Now, that doesn't apply to this guy because this was back in 2008. So despite his failure to explain what took him so long, DHS still granted him a permit to work. And at the time he made this asylum claim, he'd already been working in the U.S. for 16 years. He's paying taxes. The Social Security Administration gave him a Social Security number. So what do we do with people like this? Do you offer some sort of asylum to encourage people like this guy to come out of the shadows? Some sort of amnesty? I'm not saying we give them citizenship, but some kind of legal status where they don't have to stay in the shadow economy, and they can come out and integrate into society better and pay taxes, and we'd be able to keep better track of them. I mean, if you've been here for 20 years, made a family, built a business, paid taxes, or served in the military, or as a first responder, like a police officer or a doctor or a nurse or a firefighter, I think if you're contributing to the betterment of society, there ought to be some sort of consideration for that. Maybe pay a fine, get a green card, get on the right side of the law, go to the back of the line, in waiting for citizenship. But I think there ought to be some sort of allowance for those sorts of people. Otherwise, if they're not that kind of person, we just send you back. What do you think? I think anyone who came into the U.S. illegally or who declared asylum not at a point of entry during the Biden-Harris administration should be sent back to Mexico or wherever immediately. We get all your details. We get all your biometric info. We send you to the back of the line for asylum. So if you do come back and go through the right channels, you don't jump in front of people who are actually trying to do it the right way. And if you came here illegally and you did not request asylum under Biden-Harris, or you've committed a crime and that's how we caught you, then you get sent back and you don't get it a second chance to come back. No asylum claim should be granted. Now, let's talk about the gun issue. So we've talked about the immigration issue and the tricky part there. This guy has been charged with a violation of 18 U.S. Code 922 G5A, possession of a firearm by an alien unlawfully in the United States. Now, I know there's been some discussion recently. There have been some court rulings on the Second Amendment rights of non-citizens who were in the U.S. legally. But this is different. And some of these cases are referenced by the judge in this ruling. And I'm not going to try to bore you with all that stuff. But I just know that there's been some talk about how we deal with the Second Amendment rights of non-citizens. But this is a different sort of case. In March of 2023, Mr. Serrano Restrepo purchased firearms online and had them transferred to an FFL in Ohio. So, again, this sort of points to the fact that he's trying to do things the right way. Right? He's not going to... Now, that this doesn't account for the large bulk of his... Well, I guess it does. Well, let me keep reading. He was unable to retrieve those firearms from that gun dealer from that FFL in Ohio, they would not allow him to pick those guns up because he didn't have a valid driver's license in Ohio. He had a driver's license from another state. So, but they did allow him to collect the long guns that he ordered. And I think of the 22 guns, 9 of them were long guns, and he was able to collect those by filling out a Form 4473. And on that 4473, he lied. Now, for those of you in Rio Linda, those of you who have never bought a firearm before for yourself or for someone else, the Form 4473 is a federal firearms form. It's supposed to be part of your background check. And where you fill out all your pertinent information, and there is a questionnaire on that form that asks you specifically, are you an illegal alien residing in the United States? Are you a resident, or I'm not sure how that question goes, whether it asks you if you're a citizen of the United States. How it's exactly worded doesn't matter. The question is, are you a citizen of the United States? Essentially, that's what it's asking you. And he lied and said that he was. It also asks if you are in the country on a non-immigrant visa. And he answered no on that as well. That lie, by the way, lying on a Form 4473, for those of you who don't know, is supposed to be punishable by 10 years in prison, up to a $100,000 fine. It's similar to the crime committed by Joe Biden's son, Hunter, when he lied on a form when he bought a gun. One of the questionnaire questions is, are you a drug addict? Which is obviously, yes, he was, but he answered no. That's a violation of federal law. Now, in May of 2023, Serrano Restrepo went out and obtained a driver's license from Ohio. He went to the Department of Transportation in Ohio, provided them with his work authorization paperwork that he'd gotten from DHS, and they gave him a driver's license. One that expired, I think in January of 2025, coinciding with the expiration of his work authorization from DHS. So he got a driver's license, not under false pretense. The state of Ohio gave him a driver's license, and he then went back to that FFL with his driver's license and retrieved the 13 handguns from that original online order. But again, he had to fill out another 4473 form, and he lied about his status again. So he's now lied twice. But he's lied twice for what appear to be non-nefarious reasons. I can understand, because apparently ATF kind of got wind of this and started investigating him, because between May of 2023 and January of this year, Mr. Serrano Restrepo bought 90 more firearms through 6 different purchases at that FFL. So on 6 different occasions, he went to that FFL to collect his firearms and presented himself as a dual citizen of the United States and Colombia on the 4473. 6 different times. He's now lied 8 times. Again, 8 lies that don't appear to be nefarious, because he still has all these guns. He still has all the ammunition. He's got them stored at home. He claims that some of them were for self-defense. Right? He wasn't turning around and selling them on the black market. He had 170 guns in his home when the ATF searched his home on January 10th of this year. And if you look at the photos taken by the ATF, like I said, the guns are stored in safes. and they're hung neatly in up in his closet. Don't know whether it's behind a steel door or any of that stuff, but it's this doesn't look like fly-by-night gang activity, is what I'm saying. This looks like a guy who thought he could do this legally, or thought that he could get away with it. I'm going to go with the latter, or the former, for the sake of this discussion. Now, I'm reading from the ruling by the judge, January 18, 2024, or July 18, 2024. A federal grand jury returned one count indictment charging Mr. Serrano Restrepo with possessing a firearm with the knowledge that he was an alien illegally and unlawfully in the United States in violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 922 G5A. Mr. Serrano Restrepo subsequently argued in court that clause violates his Second Amendment rights. Reading from the court decision, Mr. Serrano Restrepo argues that his indictment should be dismissed because 18 U.S. Code 922 G5A, which makes it illegal for those unlawfully present in the United States to possess firearms, is unconstitutional under the Second Amendment, at least as applied to him. The basis for his motion is the Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which rejected the previous means-end scrutiny applied by the courts to constitutional challenges of firearm regulations. Now, those of you who don't know what Bruin is, the Bruin decision overturned New York State's means test for the issuing of concealed carry permits. New York basically said you had to prove that you needed a gun before you needed to carry one before they would give you a carry permit. And Bruin basically undid all of that and said, no, you have a right to carry a firearm based on this, and these previous rulings. You can't decide who does deserve it and who doesn't. Back to the court decision, Bruin did not explicitly address the constitutionality of firearm statutes like 922 G5A, but the only circuit courts, including this one, that have addressed such a challenge after Bruin found the statute constitutional. So they cite United States versus Rangel Tapia in 2024, looks like. United States versus Citladine in 2023. So with that background, the court now turns to Mr. Serrano Restrepo's challenge. The court first looks to whether Mr. Serrano Restrepo, an immigrant unlawfully present in the United States, and his regulated conduct of possessing a firearm were covered by the plain text of the Second Amendment. Mr. Serrano Restrepo argues that his conduct of possessing a firearm as an immigrant is protected by the Second Amendment's plain text. The government does not suggest that the possession of a firearm is conduct outside the protections of the amendment, but argues that Mr. Serrano Restrepo himself is not protected because, quote unquote, the people, as in we the people, does not include unlawful immigrants. Mr. Serrano Restrepo does not dispute that he is an alien illegally or unlawfully in the United States, but argues that he is nonetheless included in the term the people and that his constitutional rights are therefore being infringed. Relying on Heller and Verdugo Urquidez, I'm assuming Verdugo Urquidez is a court case, Mr. Serrano Restrepo reasons that he is among, quote unquote, the people who have a right to bear arms because he has been part of the national community and developed sufficient connections with the United States to be considered part of its community. To illustrate his connections to this country, Mr. Serrano Restrepo explains that during his 16 years in the United States, he sought asylum. He was allowed to remain in the country to pursue employment. He complied with all requests for information he received from the United States, USCIS, I can't remember, Customs. I don't know what that acronym is. There's so many acronyms in the government. I'm hoping that the Doge committee just does away with a crap ton of them. But anyway, he obtained an ITIN, which is a taxpayer identification number, a social security number, and he paid taxes. He also formed and operated a successful business and purchased property in this country. According to Mr. Serrano Restrepo, his conduct reveals connections great enough to qualify him as a member of the national political community entitled to protections under the Second Amendment. Regardless of his status under our country's immigration laws, Mr. Serrano Restrepo is surely a person, and in any ordinary sense of that term. As a result, he is guaranteed certain protections under the Constitution, and his lack of documentation does not support a per se exclusion from the people protected by the Bill of Rights. Without guidance to the contrary from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, this court presumes the term the people is construed broadly and could include some immigrants unlawfully present in this country. The problem here is that using Heller and others, the court is bound by the test of whether the case in question is in keeping with the history of firearms ownership and regulation going back to the founding. This is the issue here with this particular case. Heller created, and Bruin and other cases subsequent to Heller created this test that basically said, is this thing that you're trying to regulate, is it in common use? Was it in common use was the understanding of firearms ownership consistent with the history of firearms ownership going back to the founders? The founders did not place restrictions on illegal immigrants. This I found an interesting point. The founders didn't say anything about this. So the Constitution is silent on this particular question of whether or not someone in the country illegally could be protected by the Second Amendment. They did not say anything about it because, as the court points out in this brief or in this decision, the general societal problem addressed by by 18 U.S. Code 922 G5A is one of more recent vintage. The United States did not implement federal immigration controls until the 19th century. The lack of a federal immigration regulation suggests that the presence of unlawful immigrants in the United States, and by extension, their possession of firearms, was not a general societal problem that the founders addressed in any significant manner. So the court then has to look to analogous historical regulations that burdened the Second Amendment right for similar reasons or in the same way, like Bruin. So the government is arguing that disarming unlawful immigrants is consistent with the nation's history of disarming those who are not members of the quote-unquote political community. I want to get your thoughts on this argument by the government. Okay, this is the government's argument against Restrepo or Serrano Restrepo and against the idea that this clause is unconstitutional. I want to get your thoughts on these arguments. At the time of the Second Amendment, when it was ratified in 1791, this is again reading from the decision, the government contends that the Second Amendment did not protect the right to bear arms of, quote, outsiders, such as Native Americans, Catholics, or Loyalists who refused to swear oaths of allegiance. These outsiders were disarmed because they were perceived as dangerous to public safety or social stability and thus not trusted to possess firearms. That's to our modern sensibilities, that might get your hackles up, especially the Catholics and Native Americans thing. But hear me out here. These are not my thoughts. This is, again, reading from the decision, which is basically summarizing the government's case. In England, before the Revolutionary War, the right to bear arms was not made available to the whole population. Instead, the right was limited in the English Bill of Rights to subjects which are Protestants, suitable to their conditions, and as allowed by law. When the right to bear arms made its way to the American colonies, so too did the prohibition on Catholics owning firearms unless they swore loyalty to the crown. See Heller. So they're quoting the Heller decision as well, describing the right to bear arms in the English Bill of Rights as the predecessor to our Second Amendment. Several states, including Virginia, again reading from the decision, including Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, restricted religious minorities from possessing firearms. Virginia, for example, required individuals to swear allegiance to the Hanoverian dynasty and to the Protestant succession, and to swear an oath abjuring the ecclesiastical authority of the Pope. Likewise, before the Revolutionary War, colonial governments disarmed persons unwilling to affirm their allegiance to the British Crown. As the American Revolution gained favor, the, quote, practice of conditioning people's ability to keep and bear arms on their undivided allegiance to the sovereign continued as people who did not support the revolution were ordered to turn over their guns. This is again, this is quoting another case, United States versus Gil Salan. In the same spirit, again quoting, many individual states continued the right or conditioned the right to bear arms on the swearing of an oath of allegiance to the individual state. These statutes revealed that there was a well-established tradition of prohibiting the possession of firearms by those who did not swear loyalty to the government or political community. Those who did not swear an oath were perceived as dangerous to the political community due to their divided loyalties. Oath-based restrictions prevented firearms from ending up in the hands of those who, quote, have not demonstrated allegiance to this nation and might do the nation harm. These restrictions, again, still quoting, although flawed, reflect an attempt to distinguish between those, quote, likely to comply with certain communal obligations, end quote, and societal norms, and those who were less likely to do so. Today's immigration system functions as a proxy for national allegiance. Although an imperfect comparison, persons unlawfully in the United States are not presumed to have any allegiance to the United States. Following this reasoning, several district courts held post-Bruin that 922 G5A is sufficiently analogous to the history and tradition of restricting the possession of firearms by those who refuse to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States, thus disarming unlawful immigrants like Mr. Serrano Restrepo, who have not sworn allegiance to the United States, comports with the nation's history and tradition of firearm regulation. Mr. Serrano Restrepo, as applied challenge, therefore lacks merit. The swearing of an oath of allegiance occurs through the naturalization process, not through his asylum application or his years of living in the United States. Consequently, 922 G5A is not unconstitutional as applied to him. So my question to you, in hearing all of this, do you agree with that idea? Do you agree that 922 G5A in 18 U.S. Code is constitutional and that we should deny the Second Amendment protections to those who are here illegally? This is a tricky one because we argue that the Bill of Rights is not what gives us our rights or grants us our rights. It's what guarantees us the rights that are granted by God. So shouldn't the right to be armed for self-defense apply to all people everywhere? I believe it does. However, I also believe that the restrictions on ownership in 18 U.S. Code 9, Section 922, as summarized in the questionnaire on Form 4473, are justifiably restrictive. We don't want drug addicts like Hunter Biden or mentally ill people possessing firearms. We always are arguing whenever there is a shooting and everybody wants to blame the guns. We're quick to point out mental health is an issue, right? So we want to make sure that people who are mentally ill, drug addicts, they don't have possession of firearms. We don't want convicted felons or fugitives from justice possessing firearms. Now, there's some debate to be had about felons who paid their dues to society and whether they should have their Second Amendment rights restored. That's a discussion for another day, but as it stands right now, that seems a justifiable restriction to me. We don't want people who have no allegiance to the United States, who are here illegally, in violation of our existing immigration laws. We don't want them to possess firearms. Now, let's put these two questions together. The question of immigration and the question of guns. The guy violated the law. He clearly did not believe that he was violating the law, or he did think he knew he was violating the law and he thought he could get away with it. I don't know what the truth is or what he thought, and neither do you. So let's not assume. Let's do the right thing here with the Eighth Commandment and put the best construction on everything, right? So let's just assume that he thought what he was doing was legal. I mean, if you look at the way he stored the firearms, if you look at the fact that he went through an FFL, I know he lied on the forms, but he clearly thought that whatever he was doing, it seems to me that he thought he had some legal status that allowed him to do this. So let's assume that's the case, that he thought he was okay to do this. But ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right? That's the old saying. So he's broken the law, or at least he's charged with doing so. Let's make sure allegedly broken the law. Let's get that in there so we don't get sued. He's going to trial next year. He has been charged by a grand jury, so he's going to go to trial. So if he is found guilty, what do we do with him? Do you send him back to wherever he came from nearly 20 years ago? I'm not sure you do. I think you fine him, you send him to prison if, whatever his sentence ends up being, and then you allow him to get back to trying to be a productive member of society. Now, that may not be a popular opinion given what we've been through with the border over the last 4 years, particularly. And given what we know about the ATF and the way they go after law-abiding citizens or people who make a mistake on a Form 4473. But the punishment, I think, should fit the crime. If it's a paperwork crime, kind of like Hunter Biden, I think in this case, again, best construction, I don't think it's even like Hunter Biden. I think Hunter Biden knew good and well he was lying on that form. I mean, how do you not know, I'm a drug addict, go fill out the 4473 and then go home and, snort grated cheese off the floor. I think I'm pretty sure he knew what he was up to. This guy, I think you could make the argument that he didn't. I think, but like Hunter Biden, who's been convicted, I think you get a fine or jail time or whatever, and you're on your way. You get back to your life. And in this guy's case, assuming he didn't do something worse than lying on the 4473, he should get the same treatment. He should get the same treatment that Hunter Biden's gotten. Now, following that, should he be deported? after he serves his time or pays his fine or whatever? If so, what then happens to his house and his business while he's in prison and maybe whatever employees he has? Admittedly, if I'm honest, I'm not quite sure how I feel. I fully support plans by the incoming Trump administration to deport as many illegals as possible. But I think that effort would best serve America by focusing on the people who came over the last 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration and those who are criminals and deadbeats. And in this case, again, assuming he's convicted, he would be a criminal. But prior to that, he'd been here for 18 years, and was living a productive life. So this is a weird edge case that's not really cut and dried, I think. What do you think about this? I want to hear what you guys think. Did the judge get it right here? Is 18 U.S. Code Section 922 G5A constitutional? The prohibition on firearms possession by illegal aliens? Or do you think that illegal aliens should have a right to what we call, or should they have that same God-given right to bear arms? Is this a reasonable restriction, or do you think it's an infringement? I'm of two minds on this, I think. But I'd love to hear what you think. So visit the feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave a comment on the Facebook page. Leave a comment on our YouTube channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think should be done with this guy if he's convicted? Is this the kind of person that you send back, despite 18 years of being a productive member of society, essentially? Or do you have him, pay the due penalty for his crime and then let him go back to his life? Give him some sort of legal status so that he's not back in the shadow economy again. We don't lose track of him. I would love to hear your thoughts. So again, visit the feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback, and let us know what you think. That's all I've got for today. It is a wonderful time of year. We're getting ready to start Advent at the end of the week. And Thanksgiving, of course, on Thursday. I hope you have a safe and happy Thanksgiving with your loved ones, and safe travels if you are on the roads or in the air for the Thanksgiving holiday. Be sure to tune in next week. Episode 429 is going to be our online hangout for November, our next to last hangout of the year, our penultimate hangout of 2024. So be sure to tune in for that. And if you would like to come join us, consider joining the Reformation Gun Club at reformationgunclub.com for as little as whatever you would like to donate for the year. We would love to have you join us and would appreciate your support. So that's all for today. Until we get back together next week for our online hangout, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.